Hi friends, your excellence insight for the day. Change your story and you can change the trajectory of your life. For those of you who have been following me for a while, you might be aware that I've spent the past few years in Britain. I've been subjected to endless amounts of Peppa Pig and Shaun the Sheep. But there is a rather brilliant ad that's been appearing on the TV for a while now, and it's part of a recruitment drive for the Royal Navy. And it plays on the idea of the story you tell yourself about yourself, your narrative about your own life, and how incredibly powerful that can be. The way that these ads play out, you start off with a young man or a young woman growing up in insert obscure British town here. And essentially what it says is, I grew up in the small place that no one had ever heard of. That's where I was born, but I was made in the Royal Marines. I was made in the Royal Navy. The whole idea is that the change in the story you tell yourself matters. Let's come up with a hypothetical young man here, and we'll call him Luke on the important grounds that that's the name that just popped into my head. Now, Luke grows up in a small, dreary town with a fairly bleak group of friends, mates if you want to be British, and they lock themselves into a certain picture story about who and what they are. And the level of behavior is not particularly aspirational. In fact, woe betide Luke if he tries to break out from the group and to become something in his life. Because what tends to happen in a small pool of thinking is that the people around you will tend to hold you to that style, that standard of thinking. It becomes the thought pool in which you exist. Now, what happens in these ads is Luke leaves that scenario and suddenly finds himself in a place where people are telling him things like, you can be a warrior. You can be something significant in the world. You can get out into the world and see different places and make a difference. You're a strong man. You're an intelligent woman. You have potential. Now, what happens there is that Luke's entire internal narrative shifts completely. He starts to tell himself a different story about himself. And those frameworks of thinking are phenomenally powerful. The Word of God says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Our frameworks for thinking create our behavior. Our behavior creates our world. If you spend your entire life telling yourself a story that looks downward, one that is essentially negative, that's aimed down at the gutter, your behaviors and your actions start to follow that, and it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. Look up to the stars, and everything changes. So, it's a simple test for you today. What story do you tell yourself about yourself? What is your internal narrative? Now, everyone struggles, everyone goes through difficulties, but the level of narrative can change. Say, for example, you have a big presentation coming up. The narrative can go, I can't believe I have to stand up in front of 100 people and do a public speech. Or your narrative can go, I get to stand up in front of 100 people and do a public speech. This is my chance to shine. And the narrative that you construct in your head, the story you tell yourself about yourself, changes how you behave. It becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. As you think about it right now, is your story about yourself essentially good or essentially negative? Are there negative things that need to be excised? Can you replace it with a different story? Luke behaves in one way when he lives in a dreary little town, locked into a certain set of behaviors and values and norms and realities by his peer group. And Luke becomes an entirely different man when he's told that he could be a warrior, when he is told that he is representing his nation. The story you tell yourself changes things. I worked with a leadership group in Surrey a couple of weeks ago, and we spent most of the morning discussing this simple idea. Business-wide, what is the narrative here? Do you see your organization as small but mighty? We punch above our weight. Or are you telling yourself an essentially negative story? Which narratives need to change? The behaviors follow on from the narratives. If you get the story right, you will get most of the behaviors right. If you get the story wrong, by chance or by default or by accident, you may have one or two of the behaviors right. But by and large, the whole machinery of the thing is pointed in the wrong direction. What is the story you tell yourself about yourself. Change your narrative, and you can change your trajectory.